Hi, everybody, welcome. I'm going to do this early, so I don't have to do it at the end.
Oh,
As always, a lovely gift for our presenter. My name
now.
my name is Dean. I'm actually with the Academic Success Center, which is part of CITL and some magic. My job here is to make sure everything goes okay, but I don't need to do anything because Calvin's in the back and he makes sure everything goes okay. So I'm here to actually introduce Connie. So Dr. Connie Morrison, who I'm just overheard say she's not related to our new president. Are you sure?
I'm, as far as I know. I will do digging this afternoon.
So we're talking about AI in a different approach and how we can use that better in the classroom.
Or anti, but anyway, but another,
Anti-AI, how we come up with different approaches to things. So I'm going to simply pass the torch to you and let you get started.
Delighted to be here and welcome, and thank you for being here. And Kelvin, thank you for the support and problems I'm going to throw at you through the day, through the afternoon. I appreciate that. So I'm here from the Faculty of Education, where I've been teaching since before I was done my doctoral work there. And before then, I was an English language arts teacher in the public system, where I taught both junior and senior high.
Okay.
And so I'm here to talk to you not about how to use AI in the classroom, but a lot of the discussions we've had out of the keynotes presentation this morning, from the generative AI working group, community of practice that we were just having a conversation about common concerns about what we're noticing in our classes and how students are interacting with or passing off information that they pretend is theirs, but we suspect has been generated in another way. And what I've come to as an approach to trying to have a workaround with one of my assignments. And so I'm going to talk you through that and what I've done and what I hope to do, and hopefully we'll have a chance to try in a small version by dividing it into a couple of small little groups. A Reader's Digest abridged version of what it is that I will be doing with my students, and then we can talk about it and troubleshoot it. We tell you what you like and what you don't like, and what you think will work and what you think will be a train wreck, and wonder if it might be something that you could adapt to your own practice. And at any point, if you have questions or comments and you want me to stop and clarify, I'm totally okay with you stopping and interrupting. So please feel free to do so. So, the title of the presentation was very hastily put together. Are you sick of it? Because I was kind of getting sick of, in graduate classes where we often have our students, or I have often had my students read material or watch video content and then reflect on that. I was getting to the point where I was a little more than irritated that a lot of the responses seem to be generated by something other than their own imaginations. And I was, as many of us have expressed, starting to get a little more than frustrated with that. So I was noticing this, but I was also noticing a disconnect that was happening in my graduate classes, where in the past students would have lots of conversation with one another in the discussion threads. And all of a sudden, it wasn't happening anymore. I was talking to colleagues who were teaching in the public system and teaching in high school, and they were lamenting that students don't talk to each other anymore. Teachers go into classes and students don't respond. And I've even experienced that this year, this fall, teaching in my undergraduate classes, where I go in and normally it's vibrant and chatty and like, and I'm like, hey, come on, let's start. And they don't even talk to each other. They're not engaged. Something happened. I'm not sure what it is. So I started with these two, I thought, completely different problems. But the more I'm thinking about it, I don't know that they're completely different problems at all. I don't know that they're completely, whether they're separated at all or whether they're more interconnected than I thought. So I just want to draw attention to, I went into Brightspace into my old course shell into Education 6106, which is literacy and pop culture, that I've been teaching for 104 years. And in every possible way possible, I've been teaching it face-to-face, I've taught it in hybrid models, I've done Polycom, I've done it online, completely asynchronous. This term, I will be at a combination of asynchronous and synchronous delivery. Partly because that's what my students want, and I always ask my students, no matter what course I'm teaching, at the end, if I did it differently, what would you like me to do? Like, how did this work for you? How do you think this would be better for another group beyond your involvement in the course? They know up front, all of my students know up front that at the end, they will be able to offer suggestions about how it was delivered or the content or what should be added. Some of the greatest things that come out of my courses that my students love the most are things that they have suggested. And I've adopted because of that. So I went back and I looked at some demographic statistic, I don't know, some stuff from 2015, so from 10 years ago. And what you'll notice, this was the week 4 discussion thread. The students each posted an original reflection based on the reading and viewing. And then there were, they responded to 2, it looked like most of them responded to 2 other posts, which would have been the expectation. And you'll see how many in red, how many of each other's posts they read. I mean, 91, they were a chatty bunch, but they were participating and engaged with one another. Fast forward to the fall, and a similar group of graduate students, they have, their posts, their original posts. Not all of them are even bothering to do one post reply, but look at the figures in red, how often they are reading each other's posts. They're not. They're going in, they're doing the bare minimum, they're getting it. And often the replies that I'm seeing are not personalized kinds of replies. They're very, well, they seem to me quite often more likely AI generated. What am I going to do about this? Because the content is stuff that I really want them to be interested in. But I feel like by moving online, we gave students all kinds of access to information and to courses and to learning opportunities in places where we couldn't necessarily reach them before. And it was such a godsend to have that opportunity. But then I feel like something has happened and now we're losing what we used to have face-to-face. So how can I bring what we have face-to-face into an online environment? So that's what I'm trying to do. That's my intent. And how am I going to get them engaged and talking with one another again? So the solution, the problem. Okay, so they're not, I think I've got these AI generated posts and I'm not convinced that they're engaging the material and they're not engaging with one another. So I decided I was going to borrow and modify a lit circle assignment that I've been using since I was a high school English teacher, and that I've modified from then to my practice in undergraduate classes. And then I'm going to change it again, mix it up. So if you're not an English teacher, how many of you might be people who taught in English language? Yeah. So are you familiar with lit circles? Have you used them? Yeah. So for those of you who have fabulous change, feel free to correct me or stop me at any point. But for those of you who are not, I'm going to give you a really quick Reader's Digest version of what they are. So I've taken the literature circle model, which I'll unpack in a second. And for the graduate level, I've combined it with critical discourse analysis, sort of, where I'm hoping that my small group discussions will read and engage with the weekly material, but also examine things like power relations, social hierarchies, hegemony, ideologies that are present within these texts, and start to read them through a critical media literacy lens. And so that they will not just come to class, read the stuff and watch the stuff, but now be working in small groups, though graded individually, but talking and having really meaningful conversations about the stuff that they read. So it's it's kind of lit circles meets critical discourse analysis meets critical media literacy to become this thing that I've called critical discourse circles, which may make sense or may be complete nonsense. I'm not sure. So for just to do a really quick introduction into how I became interested in doing lit circles. As a teacher, I was noticing there were often reluctant readers in the classroom, and lit circles were developed in the beginning by primary elementary teachers, and they do really creative, wonderful stuff that intermediate and secondary teachers eventually steal and adopt. So this was one of those cases. If I look back to my own education, I remember being introduced to Louise Rosenblatt's work and her transactional reading theory. And this was back in the time, like most of you were too young to remember Bee Gees and Staying Alive and all that kind of stuff. But it's that's like this has been around a while. But basically, in a nutshell, it's the understanding or the belief that when individuals or students come to reading text, they bring their own understanding and experiences to bear on what they read. And so they will all have different responses and reactions and interactions with the text. That's a really oversimplified version. And then I was highly influenced in my early career by an educator named Nancy Atwell. She wrote a book called In the Middle. She was an educator from New England who ended up getting fired because she was so revolutionary. And she suggested that she was American, so but she suggested that when middle school children read books, they shouldn't just have to regurgitate what the teacher thinks. They should actually sit around the kitchen table or on beanbag chairs or on the floor in little couples. And they should just talk about it. Like when you go to a movie, you don't have that. Did you notice the parallel structure in the first scene? Like you don't do that, right? I'm talking about, I have that character that reminds me of my grandmother. Like you have conversations. And so she wanted to have her students approach literature in that kind of way, sort of to take down the barriers. Let's just talk about the real stuff. So, fast forward a little bit. I'm teaching high school, and I get the guys, and they're reluctant readers, and they don't read anything. And someone says, "Well, write lit circles," and so I did. And so essentially, you offer a number of novels to your students. You do little book talks. They rank them in order of the ones that they like or don't like. And then you go home on the weekend and you just work them all into groups. And everybody has to get put in a group where they pick the book. You can never put a student in a group where they didn't pick. But you can manipulate the groups so that you don't have, the hard cases in the same group. So, right, that's a good thing for it. Then you bring in, and you've got like a baggie. It's just like baggie books. And like great. You get a baggie, you get the novel, you get a package, you got kit. You've got a kit with all of these different roles that the students can choose from as they go through reading a novel. And they get separated into groups around the room, and they get to decide how much of the book they're going to read every night as a group, and they agree upon it. And every meeting, they not only agree, okay, we're going to read the first 30 pages, but I'm going to take this role, and you're going to be that role, and you're going to be that role, and we're going to talk a lot about books, this role. And they go off and they do their thing, they read, and then they come back having done their role based on the stuff that they've read, and they have a conversation about it. And they talk to each other. And these students who would never read for me will read for their peers. And it drives you nuts. It's like, yeah, right, you're going to read for John, but you won't read for me. But they do. And they have these conversations, and they're meeting in the hall, and then they chase you down in the parking lot. So Miss, do you remember that book you remember with Daddy? Like, it's the first book I ever read, but I don't think I've read another book. But it's true, they read, they do, and they engage. It's the coolest thing. So I have no camera, switch off. Is that something I'm supposed to do? Anyway, so students will do for their peers and be responsible to meet with their peers in a way that they aren't necessarily before. This is what was happening at high school. So then I get to, and it's multiple ways of learning, and it's UDL, and it's all these things even before it was fashionable. So I thought, if I'm going to teach English language arts teachers, intermediate and secondary, how to be English language arts teachers, And they need to do lit circles in classrooms. I very much believe in sequential teaching. So let's make them do this thing so that they know where the problems are, where the catches are, so that they're comfortable with this method. So I started introducing lit circles into English methods class at the undergraduate level about 7 years ago. And at the end of the course, I'm like, that's my favorite thing. And we do it again. Just don't. So, but then I teach them again in their program after they've done their internship, and they would often end up in my class on diversity and social justice. And so we don't have multiple different novels to read in diversity and social justice, but we did have this text that I was struggling with my students because they weren't reading, because they were undergrad students, and they just don't sometimes reading to read. So one of the students said, well, why don't we do lit circles? Right? With everybody reading the same text, yeah, we'll all just be in different groups. Okay, so we tried it, and guess what? They started reading the text, and then they started coming in with their multiple perspectives, and they were talking with each other, and they were arguing with each other, and they were having really meaningful, difficult, important discussions around race, class, gender, and ability. This is going to work. Grading it is a challenge. We'll get to that later, but it started to work. So fast forward to now, and I'm having this issue with my graduate students, and I'm thinking, maybe I can try this with a twist, because I mean, you've got to have a different expectation at a graduate level and around the level of rigor that you're asking. And the content is different, it's a lot more difficult. But would this maybe give me an opportunity to have my students interacting with one another again in a way that I'm really longing for? So here's how it works. We choose the content that we need to do, and I've done 4 modules in this next upcoming offering of literacy and pop culture, where the students are still going to be reading and viewing the same amount of content that they would have been if they were normally just doing reflections. And there are still some reflections that are available, and that's still part of the course evaluation. So I'm only doing part of the course this way. I'm mixing them up. A couple weeks are going to be online, a couple weeks are going to be with these critical discourse circles. The instructor will plan who gets to go on what group. I just plan to randomize them unless I have a group of students who are all from a different time zone, and it would make sure, it would make it easier if they were in a different time zone. I'm not sure if that's even going to matter. Anyway, in case of, when they want to meet offline, or if they want to meet offline. But it's important that the teacher or the instructor has the capacity to put the students in the groups. Otherwise, you get students who are just the buddies. They're all, and then the people that, they'll have a couple that will not be invited to a group, and that's not cool. But you also want people who have different ideas and opinions. You want your students who don't normally talk to each other, talking to each other. That's the point. We need this social discourse, we need critical discourse, we need ideas to bump up against one another that wouldn't normally otherwise. The students have the agency in picking, in a typical lit circle fashion, they would pick how much they read and at what pace. The only rule is you got to end by this date, so figure it out. So a little bit of math in English. How many pages do we need to do? Where in this graduate course, they are going to be given the content for the weekly module, they won't get to say what they get to read, although one of the roles will have them going out looking for other research and other material, so they will have the freedom to bring in whatever they want. The students, there's a bank of roles possible for them to choose, and they get to choose whichever ones they want. There are only 2 rules. One is that each week somebody has to be the discussion director, because somebody has to keep the group organized. They keep everybody on time and make sure everybody has a chance to speak and lead. The second one is that you can't repeat a role. So if you have been in high school, if their favorite role is illustrator, because they get to illustrate something or draw something, or or they also like to be a maestro. So you pick a scene from a novel and you have to do the playlist for what that scene in the novel would have, or what that chapter in the novel would have. And you can do all kinds of really wildly creative ones. The ones at the graduate level are a little bit more academic, but they get to pick what roles they're going to do, and they can't repeat it twice. So they rotate. You have to give them time to meet in class, because if you can't pop in as the teacher or the instructor into each group to see that they're actually doing the work, you don't know for sure that they're doing the work. So, and you need to be there to troubleshoot and answer questions too. So I always give the class time for this to happen, but it is sometimes you're not lecturing, you're not talking. Yeah, but something, it is the most productive stuff that comes from these conversations. Because they know at the end of the class, we're all coming back together, and I'm going to hear from this group, from this group. We're going to talk about, argue about, I thought it was this perspective, and I brought it from this perspective. And really interesting, meaningful discourse happens. And then the assessment part can be a little bit tricky, and I'll talk a little bit about that more at the end, because it's not a written output in the same way as passing in or submitting an online reflection, but you're still responsible for talking points and main ideas. So there's not the temptation to have ChatGPT, flesh it out or, do your talking points for you. Yes, there's potential that could still happen, but because it's not formal writing, it's about a talking, it's about a reading, it's about analyzing and synthesizing and then communicating what it is, and then the reflection that comes after. How did it go? What points did you get to make? What did you make? Do you think people understood what you were saying? All kinds of guiding questions, but a critical and thoughtful reflection that comes afterwards. I do ask the students to, at the end, so I will do this 4 times with my graduate students, and then at the end of the 4 times, each time they've met, they pop in their notes. They can be notes, they can be handwritten scribbles. That I just want something, proof that you brought something to come. So, and then at the end, I want a reflection about how the overall process went, and I want you to give some. I will also have an opportunity to give you a grade, but I want you to tell me what did you learn? What was valuable, and how did this help shape how you understand this form of diversity? Right? So far, so good? Okay, so really quick, how does the class run? They come in, they will meet for 30 or 40 minutes, having an opportunity to share their ideas about what they read. One of the roles you'll see in a second is a media generator. So they might be bringing a clip. So there has to be an opportunity to share what we saw. Then we come back as a full class, have a conversation. They choose their roles and they go on off and do the reading or the viewing for the next class. So this is where I need to go to. So we're going to try it here. This is where it could all go crazy. Right here, I don't have a.
Use the mouse right after.
Oh, this. Okay, so in my class, all right, in my class, during one of the weeks where we talk about, we talk about all kinds. I guess I'm close the door because it's going to get loud. I'm going to show you the first 4.5 minutes of a film that we would use in literacy and pop culture. Before I show you that, do you want to get in groups and do your role or pick roles first, or do you want me to show you this and then you can get in roles in groups? Show it first. Okay. So just initial, and again, we're doing a very small, short version of this. So I think this will speak for itself. We're just going to watch for a second. So it's called Theaters of War. It's from Media Education Foundation. Check the volume.
Can I download? respondents forced to that hard time speech and friendship.
Well, they finally did. It's been more than 30 years, but average is back. It's hard to miss the news.
Never is that. Back in the back.
I'm definitely feeling another feeling up here.
The Pentagon was feeling love too. But these cultures, why limit the contract and allow the US military to weave in key talking points?
Okay. Sorry, apparently the folks online can't. So. Sorry.
See if they can hear you.
Oversee the script, require official screening before it's released.
We can back up if we need to be just 30 seconds.
You may not remember the original film as an instrument for engineering public opinion, but the Pentagon does. The office that supplied that aircraft carrier and all its F-14s said as much in its own database. The completed rehabilitation of the military south, which had been established by the Vietnam War. You might wonder how often they do this and how deep the influence goes.
This is the Army Air Force's first motion picture unit. How was it cowboy?
Propaganda. I've been studying it the better part of my adult life, especially the war variety. Read the books, taught the courses. I knew the military had an office for helping with movies, but we didn't even know basic things about it. How many films? Were there really script changes? What were they? It might as well have been a room locked up in some dusty corner of the Pentagon. Then documents started to get out. Some real revelations. The paper trail led me to a couple of British researchers who've been filing countless Freedom of Information Act requests. I didn't quite know what I was getting into, but they were delivering thousands of pages. I find news just about every day.
Hi guys, new documents arrived this morning. These are some of the US Army script notes on Man of Steel, Superman TV.
With that door blew, I had a glimpse of something way bigger than I thought possible. But this journey was just getting started.
The Pentagon is powerful in the film and TV industry because they have expensive toys. They have submarines, they have aircraft carriers, they have extras, they have pilots, they have helicopters.
That is going to give them rights, usually contracted in, to change the script.
You can call it censorship, you can call it propaganda. It's all of these things.
But this is more insidious than actually sort of state-controlled and state-produced propaganda, because it passes off as just entertainment.
Are you the ranking officer? That's what propaganda is the most effective. Be a little bit more open to incorporating those ideas because your defenses are down.
Some people probably would say, well, yeah, I've heard of this, like the Top Gun, maybe Black Hawk Down, maybe some of them are the series.
But what they don't know is how systematic this has been and how huge this operation has been.
Now, these freedom of information requests that have been successful allow us to actually look at that list, and it's stunning.
What we've found is that thousands upon thousands have been affected and are often rewritten at script level by the national security state in the United States. Do normal people know about that? So they don't.
Trying to stop this. No, of course they don't. And we can probably infer they know even less now. So this was 2022. So, okay. So we'll go back. So now what I'd like to do is to divide us into a couple of groups, 4 or 5 of you. Or even if we, that's okay. If folks want, don't mind joining just a couple group. Even like like this. I'm going to put up on the board, and I'll do a really quick outline of the different roles. And I know I would not be showing film live and then asking or asking students to read something. This would be content they would have already read and processed and considered at the point where they come together. So I'm asking you to do the absolute possible with never look. So, yeah, so we're going to do 2 groups, 1 group. Yeah, sure. And if you want, we can move these apart and you can sit and talk to each other and however this. Okay, so, thank you. So somebody has to be the red. Somebody has to be the discussion director. Somebody will be critical connector. And these are just, I would have these where it could be more fleshed out in person. So you can connect to current scholarship. They would be asked to connect to course content, things that we had already done. Somebody will be a media reflector. So you might decide to, oh, I wonder about this movie that I watched or this television program that I watched. So for your, just FYI, you haven't seen the whole film. This isn't just a couple Hollywood films. It is literally like thousands and thousands and tens of thousands and thousands. But anything that is on television, FBI, NCIS, Will and Grace, for example, anything that is on television goes through Hollywood.
Yeah.
Or anything produced in Hollywood goes through the Pentagon, the FBI, the CIA, everything. All of it is rewritten in script level. You are only getting what the government wants you to see. And there is a propaganda machine that only wants things portrayed in a certain way. So if you see something and you go, why are we seeing this? Because they know it's easier to do a 2-hour infomercial and put it on Netflix and pretend it's a film than it is to try to convince you of something new. So anyway, so you can think about a film or think about something you've seen on television or one now you're going to question everything, which is the whole point of this. Somebody is asked to be the advocate or protester, so you can take up or disagree with certain key points. And again, I only gave you 4 minutes, so that's impossible. But anyway, somebody, because I'm teaching teachers, would be asked to create a lesson in response to something that they have read or seen. Or how do we address this? Or what can we do in the classroom so I can teach concepts that come from this? And again, this is almost impossible, and I'm asking you to do, but I just want to kind of walk you through the exercise a little bit. There's always the option for other. I have all kinds of other, because there might be more folks in the group than there are roles to choose from. So you can make up a role of your own, or you can just choose. Makes sense? I'm going to give you a couple minutes, and I'm just kind of, and we'll back together and squeeze it. Yes. And Melanie online. So what is the question? So that's fair. And the beauty of doing this with students who've already done it is that they've been through the process. So there's usually, especially when I did it in diversity and social justice class, there were always English students in here. So I made sure every group had an English student because they had already suffered through the lit circle process, so they knew what was happening. So somebody has to decide. The discussion director usually comes up with a couple of key questions, like they will ask the group, and they will take notes and submit. And somebody else can look at if this is right, check this, so you can go and look and see. Or somebody else can, and somebody else will be, so the advocate. So the first thing you should do is decide what role you want to do, and just chat amongst yourselves and say, I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this. And then I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to go search in the phones to see if you can find it out. Does that make sense? Yeah, same thing? So just a couple of minutes to pick roles.
Keep us on track.
Yeah, and again, you take our questions. You do.
So we would just
Hi, Connie.
Yes.
Hi, it's Sarah online. Thanks for sharing so far. You might have to put us online folks in a breakout room so that we can have this conversation. And one more little note for you, Connie, when you walk further away from the desk, it's super hard to hear you. I don't know if the mic is behind you
Oh, no, I'm
or in
wearing.
front of you. So we've been like, you've been in and out. Sorry.
Oh my goodness. No, that's okay. Thank you. I apologize for that, Sarah. I'm wearing the mic, so maybe I'm not wearing it properly, but I'll get Calvin to put you in a breakout room.
Thanks so much.
Okay. Thank you for letting me know. I appreciate that.
There are two microphones here.
Oh.
This one's for the ones, I'm not sure what times you are, if it's on print.
Okay.
This
So
one.
maybe I'll stay closer to that.
Yeah, but you
Okay.
take, like, you stay in this generator.
Okay.
Who, like,
So we've got Sarah and Melanie.
just the two of them?
Yes, please. Oh, Sebastian too, please.
Yeah.
Oh, and Laura. No, all of them. Yes, yes, you can. Yeah. Is this better, Sarah? Can you hear me here?
Yes, I think it's the kind of larger flat speaker mic that we're hearing.
I was wandering away from.
Yeah, so that's much
Yeah.
better. Thanks.
Okay, no, I appreciate your letting me know. I'm a wanderer, see? Yes, they do. Yes, 100%. And background actors. They're actually people, they're military personnel. Yep. Everything. Yep. Anytime you see a picture of the Oval Office or anything from the White House or anything government related or military related, FBI, CIA, all of it. It's crazy. Well, because there might have been a political statement, right?
Like everything, all of their.
If you want, so they might have had in one episode, they might have been off their typical set, or they might have dealt with a topic that was,
Not everything.
but, yeah, but.
Okay.
Some of that is hit on those. Let's go back to work.
Actually, it could, it's just 63. It would make somebody find out.
Except when you think about, you're right, and that's how it started, and then by 1988, it did change a little bit, and then it's, so even in like where they use a lot of CGI and stuff, it's, even if you are portraying US government, military, FBI, and like, it still has to go.
Yeah.
And they reject a lot, like a lot of stuff just gets rejected until it's tweaked enough.
And essentially the reply to US productions of Canada.
That's a great question, and I don't know. I don't know that, so I'd have to look that up. Right, so I have actually we have a family friend who's actually a. Yeah.
See, you could put whatever you.
Yes, again, here's some people from Southern New Law.
And does it get released or does it get picked up or bought, right?
Yes.
But it just doesn't get shown. It doesn't get made. Yeah.
What if you need to,
What if you,
educate a lot of this day?
And you know what, in this day and age, well, I don't know, that's a really good, well, that's a great question. So that question would be a fabulous one for a student to go down a rabbit hole and go dig and ask, because that's, if we think about critical discourse analysis and the discourses that get picked up and the ones that get silenced and the power and the hegemony, those are the kinds of critical questions I want my students asking. So go do some digging, see what you find out, and then bring that back, right? Yeah, that's a great question. You get the gold star. Or ice comes for you, right? Or something.
Oh,
So I'll give you about 3 more minutes. It's a great question. It's a great question. So I think if you think of a lot of stuff that because we have a family friend who's a CEO of a production company in Toronto, but they do things like Handmaid's Tale, lots of dystopia stuff like they did Vikings, they did a series of unfortunate events. But they're highly fictionalized, so they're not, you know what I mean? So that they wouldn't fall under these categories. You know what I mean? So they're films that wouldn't be there. Yeah. So they don't, this doesn't apply, right? So it's pre-censorship, right? Yeah. So that's not a story I'll tell. Again.
Yeah, that's some story.
So you let me get married.
So that would have gone through, that would have been, so.
Yeah.
All right. Can we come back together? Yeah. Let's come back together. So I'd love to hear some initial thoughts from the groups. The film is available on Canopy, which we as Memorial faculty and students and folks have access to. So if you want answers to some of the questions that you were asking, you are able to watch the entire film. And that might help unpack some of the things. And then you'll just never watch anything. It'll ruin. My students often tell me that literacy and pop culture ruins all their pleasure and anything they do and watch and participate in, because now they can't watch it with the same lens anymore. But anyway, the online group, were you able to have any kind of conversation, or do you have any questions or comments or thoughts about the roles or even the little snippets that you were able to see?
I thought the task was just to assign the roles at this point. I thought that was the first part.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Because it says view content, assume roles, Oh, and make dot notes of findings. No, we did not have, by the time I got in the room, we didn't even have time to assume the roles yet. So I'm afraid things are, we had to also read the transcript because there were issues with the audio. So
Oh,
we need to take a
even
couple
better.
minutes to do that.
No, that's
Um,
okay.
yeah.
My deep apologies, Melanie. And this is, so when doing this online, the students would have already watched the film, read the content, known their roles, and come to the class to go into a breakout room to discuss their findings. So this abridged version here in this presentation didn't allow for that, because I thought if I assigned homework to anybody, nobody'd come. So I apologize that wasn't made a little bit more transparent, and that it didn't work. So, but that's helpful for me to know that it didn't work.
Well, I would say this has been really helpful for me because I used to do workshop style activities in my classes where I would expect that the students would have done the reading in advance, but I wouldn't assign the roles in advance. And I wouldn't let them determine how much or what they were going to read by themselves. And so I'm really excited to implement those two new sort of engagement vectors to try and to make it work again. So thank you for those ideas. I think choosing the roles at the end and knowing exactly, deciding together as a group what to read, how much to read per time, I think that sounds like a really great idea. So yeah, that makes sense.
I hope it does. I hope it works for you. From the lit circle model, it does help when they come prepared, and especially at the graduate level, what I'm hoping is that they will still interact with the material, but they will come prepared to talk and have something to talk about. I've worked with other people across the country who've done different versions of this lit circle model, but they use it in a usability design class. And so the students, like in your case, are given the roles when they land, and then they have to go. So it can work in multiple dynamics, or in multiple different variations. So maybe this will be a way it'll work. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. In the room, Ed. In literacy pop culture? No, we actually have 2 weeks of theory first. And then it gets like, sometimes you don't want to talk to people. Yeah, it's just a lot. Yeah, because it's a lot. But yes, it is, it's heavy. Yeah. And this isn't even, this was the trailer. This is just the beginning. So it's a lot. It's a lot. It gets worse. I don't know why people keep signing up for the course. I don't know. Anyway, I'd like to hear from the two groups about some thoughts, some questions that were generated. There are really no wrong answers, but I'd just love to hear a little bit of feedback about what you thought, what you observed.
You had a great protester.
Yeah? Okay, let's hear it, Dr. Wells.
Just, once you're told, in your seat, Jerry, situations that are their expectations.
So if you keep going in the film, they will show you documents where certain films were actually meant for military recruitment. In the same way that video game companies will set up in certain locations in the poorest neighborhoods in the United States and offer an opportunity for young people to come in and play video games on the state-of-the-art stuff for free as an effort to recruit them into the military. Happens all the time. Yeah. So the writers of these, there are people who will vet the scripts and say this has to be changed, that has to be changed. But with under the direction that it has to portray U.S. and U.S. military interests in a positive light. And so they get to say what happens, and they just reject the scripts otherwise, right?
And there are some people that are trying to train military scenes and military just like available.
Yeah.
They have to.
They have to. Yeah, and in fact, sometimes there are writers at the Pentagon who they actually rewrite the scripts, but they don't get listed as writers in the credits. They get listed as consultants, military consultants. And then they do have military consultants who will say, you know, that's not a realistic thing to take two planes and fly them upside down so that their see-through canopies are looking at each other and top that. That's not a physical thing that can happen. And Hollywood says, yeah, it's okay, it's really good. Like, so there are some things that they do because it's great film, great Hollywood stuff. But so they listen to some of the impact, some of the stuff, and then they do what they want for other things. But it doesn't hurt the image of US military to show an impossible maneuver with planes. It just makes us look good, right? Some really great questions that came from this group. I was overhearing a lot. Would you mind sharing some?
Yeah, I guess what happens if you make a movie and Pentagon doesn't like it, but you distribute it? We're curious.
Yeah, so there's a couple of layers to that. So if you keep watching the film, it becomes clear that you don't get to make the movie in the first place because you don't get access to this stuff. But then before it gets released, it doesn't get released if it's contrary to the contract. So if you depicted, so for example, they didn't want to have depictions of soldiers who were having trouble and having addiction issues as a result of what happened during the Vietnam War. So if you portray that, it doesn't make it to the screen. But there was also a really great comment. What if we made the film in another country? What do the rules apply? And I said, I don't know. So those are the kinds of really great questions that your grad students can dig into, or your students can dig into, and then they can bring and like, okay, this is what I found. I had this question. I wondered, is there a workaround? How can we make these stories? Because it's essentially censoring art, right? And so if we want to tell a true story, how do we get that story told? Do I take it to another country and get it? But then I'm not going to have access. Well, can I use CGI to make a pretend White House, make an aircraft carrier, or make a submarine? How can we do this? How can we make this happen? So you go on your own, dig down the rabbit hole, and you can bring back those ideas, those thoughts, and share that kind of research because you've gone out and dug into. Or you might decide, she said this thing about NCIS, so I'm going to go back and I'm going to fact check her, and then you can see where, because it's all been accessed information. Documents have been requested and then published, so you can see that these have all been vetted through these departments. And it's not a hallway. It's an entire wing of the Pentagon. It's massive. Massive. Yeah. Oh, I have 5 minutes. It goes hi. Okay. Any other thoughts about the clip or about the process? Yes.
I'm surprised the military doesn't figure it out.
That is a really good one. It's only, but maybe, or have they? I don't know.
I'm not at liberty to say.
I don't know. Okay, now how about this? I've lost my. Okay, let's wrap up really quickly. Mouse. Which one? Okay, so here are in terms of assessment, here are some of the challenges that I have found over the last, number of years. One of the things that's really helpful is tracking daily progress. So sometimes you'll have students who are present, who are not present. I always build into the grading rubric that if you are going to miss a class, you can still submit your talking notes or submit to your group, but you can't get full marks for participating because you weren't there to have a conversation and you didn't hear what happened. So you can get hard marks because you've done the work, you've done the reading, you've done the viewing, you've asked the questions. So it's helpful to keep an accurate log of who was there for the day. I also asked the discussion director to just do a really quick note of who in the group did what roles for what days. It's just for tracking for me, right? And that's usually a quick thing to do. Assigning grades, again, I have found that that's the most challenging part of this, but I have found that by adding a self-assessment or an ungrading part to this and having the students give themselves a grade, that's been really helpful. I did try peer assessment at one time. I highly recommend not doing that. Yeah, that did not work well. It might work better for you, but.
Are you trying to do this? Repository?
Over who was the daily.
Is it you or?
Yes, yes, I would just make sure who was like, and at the end of the class, I would ask them to put their notes into the Dropbox. So I don't care if they're handwritten, I don't care if they're doodled, if it's a drawing in the back of a cocktail napkin. I want something in the Dropbox to prove to me that you didn't work before you went, right? And so, and then at the end, if they do something that moves the stand. That's a reflection of the whole piece. So I can do it that way, but also the discussion director will just kind of keep track of, okay, like the shop today, I mean, he submitted his notes, right? So I have the discussion director. Sense?
That's what we're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Addressing, how does this combat the AI stuff? This is just a really quick graphic that I'm stealing from another presentation that I did. Well, you can read. It allows students to bring their individual perspectives. It forces them to have communication with one another about the content in a critical, thoughtful way. In terms of the personalized reflections, it allows them to bring in their lived experience or the classroom experience they would have had as young teachers. I love that it's collaborative. They do love this assignment at every other level. We'll see what they think about it at the graduate level, but at every other level, they have absolutely loved this. And at the end of the term, when I ask, what do I do different? What do I do the same? They always say, whatever you do, don't get rid of the lit circles. So I'm hoping this cohort will say, keep the critical discourse circles. And because they're going off, they're asking their own sets of questions, they're taking on multiple roles, they're changing it up, and they're accountable to one another. It's my hope that it will bring the collegiality back into these classrooms and the social discourse that is really important and that has been missing a little bit, but that it'll also inspire them to bring their own ideas and their own findings rather than to rely on what ChatGPT can summarize or how they can summarize it. Yes, yes.
One thing that I actually involved in. So that's wonderful. So the second thing is that so the principle is that everyone will ask like questions, right? Is that the thing? Like we watch the video, we come up with some questions, or will we come up with some notes, right? Or
so if for example in this week there will be that video, but I think there's there are probably two other articles that you will read in advance. And let's say you are a classroom connector. You will take all the stuff that goes in your mind and you'll go, okay, if I was going to teach a class to my students and address one of these issues, what could I do? And I will also, just because that sounds like a really cool thing to ask a person to do, I also have some really great websites for media literacy educators where you can go and go, oh, okay, here are my issues, here are some lesson plans, oh, here are some ideas, I can change these up, I can add. So I will, you're not completely back. But yes, does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. The thing is that if I like honestly, right? Yeah. Honestly, I know, let's say I know some students who have just used the videos and just get up this points.
Yeah.
Ask the ChatGPT to create the notes and everything.
But I'm hoping to build it into class so the roles will also relate to your experience, right? So ChatGPT isn't really great at personalizing. Right? Yeah, but you're right. You're absolutely right. ChatGPT you could still say summarize, but then you still have to come and have a conversation and defend your ideas with your peers, right? Where, you know, the goal is that you're talking and having conversations. This is what I found. This is what I like. This is, you know, that's the point. Yeah, but you're right. I don't know if there's any room we can build that will completely keep it ChatGPT out. Yeah.
Just a thought, I'm sorry, I wanted this, I'm not sure about this in context, but like,
This one?
like I'm assuming these group conversations in class or on arranged time between the groups. Can you ask them perhaps to actually
Record them. You can, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Recording and then at a given time, like they'll know that scroll through and like just look to see if they're actually talking.
yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's an excellent question. I have thought about that too. So when they come to the synchronous class, we'll have our, you know, we'll do whatever we do, and then they go out to their online, the bongo room, and yes, those have recording features. So I can, because I can drop into each of them, but I can't be there all the time. But knowing that they are recorded, I think would be an important piece of that.
So you have to call the language here, not necessarily negative.
Oh, in here or in the group? Here in the group. That's what you have, Patrick. I'm kidding.
Sometimes maybe having a vertical expressive language that ChatGPT would never come up with.
Right.
Might be useful to ask students to include some of those
Yes.
quotations.
Excellent point.
Because that would be something that ChatGPT
Would not. That's an important.
Should wouldn't, but
No.
there were other very expressive things that said that.
Yeah. No, my goodness. I thank you very much. Thank you, folks online. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And I'm sorry that it didn't work. I'm just sorry that we had technical difficulties.
Problem. Thank you, Connie, and great
I
to meet you, Melanie, and friends. Question, was that Rhoda asking a question a little bit earlier? I thought it was her voice, and we just did a course online together, and she's
yes,
a beautiful soul, so I'm glad she's there with you.
yes, thank you. My goal is to make Melanie, thank you for that. That's an excellent point. Thank you, Melanie. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I've been doing these individual submissions and then meet with me one-on-one to discuss them and trying to figure out how I would scale that up for when I have larger classes. So if I were to evaluate one group at a time and just sit in on the discussion, I think I could really scale it up. Thank you so much for this.
Yeah. I hope it works. Thank you. And Sarah, I'd love to grab coffee. Yes. Yes.
Sounds good.
Okay.
I think the next presentation.
Thank you, Connie.
Thank you very much.
Excellent. That's a great idea.